What if the most terrifying things aren't hiding in the shadows, but right out in the open? A man who watches you from across the street, a secret message left on a sticky note, or a voice that whispers an instruction you know you shouldn't follow. This is a collection of stories about the things we almost don't notice, the signs we almost miss, and the moments that haunt us for years. But before we dive in, welcome to Third Sight Cases, the channel where creepy meets cozy. I know a lot of you'll listen to these stories while winding down or trying to sleep, and I'm here to help you with both. So hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and drop a comment where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Looking back, I can say with certainty that this was the most terrifying experience my fiancé and I have ever had. It wasn't ghosts or some horror movie cliche. It was real. And that's what makes it worse. Because when it's real, when you know that something like this could happen to anyone, it sticks with you. It lingers in the back of your mind every time you step into an unfamiliar place, every time you second guess your gut feeling. It all started with a house, a simple, cheap house that seemed like a good deal. Too good, really. But we were young and broke, and sometimes, when you want something badly enough, you ignore the warning signs. I remember the night it all started because we had been sitting in our tiny apartment, flipping through channels, when the Miss New Mexico USA 2018 pageant came on. We weren't really watching it, just letting the background noise fill the room. The contestants floated across the stage in their perfect dresses, and then a commercial break hit, one of those overly polished real estate ads. A bright, happy couple stood in front of a big, beautiful house, talking about how easy it was to own a home, how it was cheaper than renting. My fiancé and I exchanged a glance. It was one of those unspoken moments where you both know you're thinking the same thing. We were tired of renting, tired of pouring money into a place that wasn't ours. We had talked about buying a house before, but it always felt out of reach. Seeing that ad at the exact moment we were sitting in our cramped apartment made something click. We grabbed my laptop and started browsing listings that same night. Most of what we found was way out of our price range, but then we stumbled across one that seemed possible. A 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of Rio Rancho. The price was lower than anything else we had seen. The listing photos made it look bright and spacious, like a place that just needed a little love. The listing agent, let's call him Paul, responded quickly to our inquiry. His emails were brief and professional, but he insisted on meeting us in person before scheduling a viewing. That was already unusual, but we agreed. Our first meeting took place at a coffee shop in downtown Albuquerque. Paul arrived precisely on time, dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks, but there was something weird about him. His smile fell like a robot, like he had spent years perfecting the right balance between friendly and formal. His eyes, though, didn't quite match. They darted too much, as if tracking something just past our shoulders. He wasted no time with pleasantries. He flipped open a folder with the house details, pointing at various features while we sipped our coffee. The way he spoke about the house was odd. He never referred to the previous owners, just kept saying things like, "The property has been well maintained," and "It's been vacant for a while, but the structure is solid." No mention of why it had been sitting empty. When I asked why such a nice house hadn't sold, he chuckled and said the market was unpredictable. Something about the way he said it is unsettling. After about 15 minutes, he closed his folder and looked at us expectantly. He explained that his schedule was tight, and evenings were the only time he could do private showings. He mentioned he had several other properties to show during the day, and that this particular house had fewer interested buyers, so it was better to schedule after hours when he had more time to walk us through everything. He assured us it was common for serious buyers to do evening viewings, especially for homes that had been on the market for a while. That reasoning made sense, at least on the surface. Maybe it was just a leftover quirk from whoever had lived there before. Besides, we had already lost out on a few other properties by waiting too long. Every time we hesitated, someone else swooped in and took the opportunity. If we waited another week just to see the house in the daytime, we might lose this one too. It wasn't like we had a lot of options in our budget, so we agreed to meet the next day. The next evening, we drove out to the house just before sunset. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. No kids playing outside, no neighbors unloading groceries or watering their lawns. Just an eerie stillness. The house itself looked exactly like the photos Paul had shown us, but something wasn't right. In the pictures, the rooms were bright, airy, and well lit, but in reality, the place looked dull and lifeless. The walls were slightly yellowed, the windows streaked with grime, and a thin layer of dust covered nearly every surface. It was as if the house had been abandoned for years instead of just being listed for sale. Paul was already waiting for us, standing beside an older model sedan parked in the driveway. He didn't greet us right away, just watched as we got out of the car. That same rehearsed smile was on his face, but now it felt thinner, stretched. He gestured toward the house, his movement stiff. "Go ahead, take a look inside. I'll wait out here." That was the first red flag I couldn't ignore. Most agents eagerly walk clients through the house, pointing out details, making their sales pitch. But he stayed put, hands in his pockets, watching us like he was waiting for something. We exchanged a glance before stepping inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, a wave of stillness wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. The air smelled stale, like a space that had been locked up too long. There was furniture, but everything was coated in dust, as if someone had abandoned it in a hurry. The dim evening light cast strange shadows along the walls. You know, straight out of a horror movie. We weren't thrilled about the state of the house, but given our budget, we didn't have the luxury of being picky. The plan was just to check it out, see if it was something we could work with. Maybe a deep clean and some paint would bring it back to life. I took a slow step forward, and for the first time, I had the distinct sensation that we weren't alone in the house. Then, from upstairs, a quiet, deliberate creak. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, my heart thudding against my ribs. The house had been silent just moments ago, but now, somewhere above us, something is moving. Could have been the wind, could have been the house settling, but it wasn't the usual random creak. It sounded like someone shifting their weight. My fiancé turned to me, his expression mirroring my own unease. Neither of us spoke. We just listened. The air inside felt heavier now, like the walls were pressing in. I took a slow step forward, my sneakers barely making a sound against the dusty hardwood. The silence stretched, thick and unnatural. The house wasn't completely abandoned. Yes, there was furniture here and there, but it was old, untouched. Whoever had last lived here had either left in a hurry or hadn't bothered taking much with them. We moved cautiously, stepping into the nearest room. It was a small office, the kind of space someone might have used to work from home. The desk was empty, except for a few scattered papers, yellowed with age. A chair sat pushed slightly away, like someone had stood up quickly but never returned. Then, something caught my eye. A small, yellow post-it note resting on the edge of the desk. The paper was slightly crumpled, like it had been handled more than once. I picked it up and unfolded it, my fingers stiff with tension. It says, "Do not trust him." The handwriting was rushed, almost shaky. I stared at the words, my pulse hammering. My fiancé leaned over my shoulder, his breath shallow. The words sank into my brain like stones dropped into deep water. Him. Did that mean Paul? The so-called agent who had barely stepped foot inside? The one who had insisted on meeting us in person before even showing us the house? I swallowed hard and turned back toward the hallway. The air felt colder now. The smell of dust and stale air was more pronounced, like the house itself was exhaling. A floorboard creaked again, this time closer. The unease flared into something sharper, urgency. I wasn't about to stick around to figure out who or what was upstairs. I gestured for my fiancé to move, and we stepped carefully back toward the stairs. That's when I noticed it. The front door was closed. I knew we had left it open. Paul had been standing outside when we walked in, and we hadn't touched it. But now it was shut, and worse, when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't turn. It was locked. From the outside. My fiancé tried the knob, jiggling it harder, but it didn't budge. A sick feeling settled in my stomach, cold and curling. We weren't alone in here. The silence around us felt charged, waiting. Then, from upstairs, another sound. Not just a creak this time. A shuffle, slow, deliberate. And then, footsteps. Heavy, steady, moving toward the stairs. A wave of panic surged through me. My fiancé grabbed my arm, his grip tight, but I barely registered it. My mind was running through every possible scenario. Maybe Paul had locked us in by accident. Maybe there was another way out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The way the house felt, like it was watching, waiting, told me this wasn't just a misunderstanding. I scanned the room, looking for another exit, but there was nothing useful. The only door led back into the hallway. The windows were old, their latches rusted shut. I had no idea if they even opened. The footsteps stopped, right at the top of the stairs. I held my breath. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw them. Two men stood at the top of the stairs. They were huge, dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by cloth masks covering their mouths. I also noticed their hands were gloved. I think they were black leather gloves that caught the dim light. I stepped backward instinctively, pressing myself against the office doorway. My fiancé did the same, his eyes locked on them. Then slowly, one step at a time, they started descending. I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, like I was rooted to the floor. The air in the house felt thicker, heavier, like we had walked into something we weren't supposed to see. The two men moved deliberately, their footsteps slow and measured. The closer they got, the more my stomach twisted into knots. Then, just as I thought I was about to see their eyes, the hallway light above flickered once and went out. The house plunged into darkness. The second the lights went out, my body snapped into action. My fiancé grabbed my wrist, yanking me backward into the office as we both stumbled into the darkness. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything except for the sound of the men's footsteps, now quickening down the stairs. They weren't just approaching anymore, they were coming for us. The only light came from the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the dusty windows. Not enough to see clearly, but enough to make out shapes, furniture, doorways, the faint outline of my fiancé as he moved toward the window. I fumbled to grab the edge of the desk, my mind racing for options. The front door was locked. The windows upstairs were likely the same. The only way out was through the back. But to get there, we'd have to go past the staircase, right where the men were coming from. A sudden thud against the wall sent a jolt of terror up my spine. They were moving fast, too fast. My fiancé grabbed an old lamp from the desk, yanking the cord from the wall. He turned toward me, his face barely visible in the dim light. He was thinking the same thing I was. If we didn't move now, we weren't getting out. We sprinted. The hallway was a blur as we ran, the sound of boots slamming against the floor behind us. The figures were close, closer than I wanted to think about. We rounded the corner toward the kitchen, my fiancé shoving over a small table in a desperate attempt to slow them down. The back door. It was right there. My hands fumbled with the lock, fingers shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The door wouldn't budge. Rusted shut from the outside. Then I felt a sharp breath behind me. Instinct took over. I grabbed the closest thing I could, a heavy glass bowl from the kitchen counter, and swung blindly behind me. It shattered against something solid, and a loud grunt followed. My fiancé rammed his shoulder into the door, once, twice, and finally, it burst open with a splintering crack. Cold night air rushed in as we stumbled outside, sprinting across the overgrown yard. We didn't stop. Not until we were back in the car. Not until we had locked the doors and sped away so fast the tires screeched against the pavement. Paul was gone. His car was gone too, but in the dim glow of the streetlights, deep skid marks streaked across the driveway as if he had sped off in a hurry. We drove straight home, neither of us speaking, too rattled to process what had just happened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking on the wheel. By the time we finally stopped, parked in front of our tiny apartment, reality hit us like a hammer. We had almost been trapped, almost been taken. We reported the house, the agent, everything. But when the authorities went to investigate, everything was still there. The furniture, the dust-covered notes, all of it. The house looked exactly as we had left it. Yet, despite combing through every inch of the place, they found nothing useful. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone besides us had been there. It was as if the entire night had been erased, leaving behind nothing but an empty house with no answers, no leads, no evidence, no trace of who had been inside that night. And there was no record of Paul working as a real estate agent anywhere in New Mexico. To this day, I don't know who those men were or what they wanted. But I know one thing for sure. When something feels wrong, it probably is. A few nights ago, I watched a documentary about the Phantom of the Opera and how its grand premiere at Her Majesty's Theatre in London in 1986 became one of the most celebrated openings in theatre history. That same year, I was working in one of England's oldest historic libraries, established in the 1650s, located in Manchester. To protect my identity, I won't reveal its real name, but if you're familiar with the area, you might have heard the rumors about it. The memory of that premiere brought back something else, something I had buried for decades. I took the job as a student librarian, mostly to help cover expenses. I wasn't from a wealthy family, and I was the first in my family to attend university. The quiet nature of the library suited me. I liked being around books, and I liked the solitude. Most of my nights were spent alone between the towering bookshelves, shelving, cataloguing, and handling small repairs. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't need glamour. I needed the money. The job had its perks. It gave me access to an extensive collection of historical texts, some of which were so rare that few outside of academia had ever seen them. I was drawn to history, fascinated by the way stories could be preserved for centuries, locked away in pages that had survived wars, revolutions, and time itself. But with that fascination came unease, because some books, some histories, were hidden for a reason, and the restricted wing was one of them. According to library policy, this section housed fragile books, rare manuscripts, and historical documents requiring special handling. Only senior staff and pre-approved researchers were allowed access. Many of the books were kept there not because of their value, but because their condition was too delicate for public handling. Over time, fewer and fewer people had a reason to go in, and eventually it became more of a forgotten space than an active part of the library. The air in that section always felt stale, untouched, as if it belonged to another time, and I had never thought much of it. It was early October, and the library was unusually empty that evening. I had been assigned to catalogue old records, which meant staying back long after most of the students had left. My supervisor, Mr. Hargrove, had gone home early, trusting me to lock up. I didn't mind. The quiet was something I usually enjoyed. At around 8:30 p.m., I was shelving a set of old textbooks near the restricted wing when I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind filtering through the shelves, but then I heard it again, low and rhythmic, repeating in a steady chant. The words were muffled, but they sounded deliberate. I froze, my skin prickling. The voice, if it was even a voice, was coming from inside the restricted wing. The gate was locked. As far as I know, no one had been in there for a long time. I tried to ignore it. I forced myself to keep shelving, convinced it was just my imagination. But as I moved, the whispering moved too. It followed me, always a few steps behind. I could feel something at my back, close enough to touch me. And then I made the mistake of stopping. The whispering stopped with me. The silence was worse than the sound. My breath hitched, my chest tightening with an overwhelming feeling that something was right behind me. I didn't understand what it wanted. I had no reason to be afraid. But something deep in my gut told me not to turn around. I gripped the edge of the shelf so hard my knuckles ached. My body screamed at me to run. But I knew that making a scene in a library like this wasn't an option. If I caused a disruption, if my shoes clacked loudly on the wooden floors, or if I knocked something over, I could easily get reprimanded, or worse, lose my job. I forced myself to walk forward, each step agonizingly slow. My hands trembled, but I kept them at my sides, refusing to acknowledge whatever was behind me. Then the whisper returned, this time right to my ear. It whispered, "Respique poste." I still didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing. I wasn't supposed to listen. I didn't speed up, didn't break into a run. Instead, I walked steadily toward the library's exit, my ears straining for any shift in movement. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight gone. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. The next morning, I went straight to Mr. Hargrove. I told him I had heard something strange the night before, something whispering. I was careful with my words, not wanting to sound paranoid. I repeated the phrase I had heard, "Respique poste." Mr. Hargrove furrowed his brow. He recognized it as Old Latin, but admitted he wasn't sure what it meant. That made my stomach twist. I had assumed he would dismiss it as nonsense, but instead, he pulled an old reference book from a shelf and flipped through the pages. After a moment, he stopped. His finger rested under a translation. It read, "Look behind you." The blood drained from my face. I couldn't explain it, but I felt sick reading those words. The phrase hadn't been a warning. It had been an instruction. Mr. Hargrove let out a dry chuckle, brushing it off as an odd coincidence. But I saw the way his fingers tapped nervously against the book, the way he avoided my eyes. He had heard something before. Maybe not the whisper, but something. Whatever was in that restricted wing, I knew one thing. It was waiting for someone to obey. In 2017, I was driving for Uber full-time, clocking in 12-hour shifts almost every day. The work wasn't hard, but it was draining, mentally more than anything. I was stuck in this cycle of picking up strangers, making meaningless small talk, and watching my gas tank drain as fast as my energy. I didn't mind the job at first, but after months of doing nothing but driving through Los Angeles traffic, it started wearing me down. The worst part, my wife barely spoke to me anymore. I couldn't tell if she was tired of me being gone all the time, or if something else had changed, but I felt that distance growing between us. She used to call me during my shifts, checking in, asking if I'd be home for dinner. By the time early 2017 rolled around, she had stopped calling altogether. I'd come home, and it was as if I wasn't even there. That night, it was a Wednesday in February, but I barely remember the exact date. I had been on the road since 6 a.m., picking up passengers from Pasadena to Orange County. By the time 7 p.m. hit, I had an overwhelming urge to just stop. I wasn't going home, not yet. I needed space, silence, a break from driving and from her coldness. So I pulled into Puente Hills Mall and made my way inside toward AMC Puente Hills 20. I had only been to this theater once before. It wasn't anything special, just one of those old-fashioned multiplexes tucked into a dying mall. But it was close, and it had exactly what I needed. A late-night showing of a movie I didn't care about. Monster Trucks was playing. Some CGI-heavy action flick about a truck with an actual living monster inside them. I didn't care. I just wanted to sit in the dark for a while and turn my brain off. I bought my ticket, grabbed some popcorn, and walked inside. The trailers were already playing, so the lights were dimmed, casting that familiar glow that made everything look slightly unreal. The theater wasn't packed, but there were about 30 people, enough to make it feel normal. Some sat alone like me, others in pairs. The seats were old but comfortable enough, and the screen had that faint flicker you only noticed in dimly lit moments. As the movie started, I let myself relax. I slumped back into my seat, stretching my legs, letting the exhaustion sink in. The stress of work, my failing marriage, the endless driving. I pushed it all aside. The only thing I had to do now was sit, watch, and forget. For the next hour and a half, everything was normal. People reacted to the movie like you'd expect, laughing at the dumb jokes, gasping at the action scenes, whispering to their friends. The guy sitting directly in front of me was shifting occasionally, leaning forward during intense moments, chuckling softly at the jokes. Then the credits rolled. The house lights flickered on. I stretched, blinking against the sudden brightness, waiting for people to gather their things and start filing out. But they didn't, because the theater was nearly empty. I sat there for a second, my body suddenly tense. There had been 30 people when the movie started. I was sure of it. But as I looked around, only 7 of us remained. The man who'd been sitting right in front of me, the one who had laughed, shifted, reacted like a normal person, was gone. His seat was still indented, as if someone had just been sitting there, but he wasn't there anymore. I turned my head slowly, scanning the room. The other 6 people left in the theatre looked just as confused as I felt. Where did everyone else go? There was no scattered popcorn, no left-behind drinks, no sound of shuffling feet or zipping jackets. It was like they had just vanished. I stood up, gripping my jacket a little tighter. Maybe I had just zoned out, too tired to notice people leaving earlier. That had to be it. There was no other explanation. Still, the feeling that something was wrong sat heavy in my chest as I walked toward the exit. The air in the hallway felt colder than before. I had come here to clear my head, to escape, to take a break from stress. Instead, I left feeling like something had followed me out. I was 16 or 17 when this happened, during my senior year of high school. My friends and I had a usual hangout spot, a small, quiet beach along Lake Pend Oreille. It wasn't some popular, family-friendly place. There were no lifeguards, no bathrooms, barely even a trail leading to it. It was the kind of spot you only knew about if someone else took you there. People came for different reasons, some to drink, others to hook up, but mostly it was just a place to sit by the water, away from parents, away from responsibilities. The water stretched endlessly, and at night it was so dark it looked like it could swallow you whole. We liked the isolation. It felt like the only place we could talk freely, like we weren't being watched or judged by anyone. Or at least, that's what we thought. That night, we didn't have any plans. It was just one of those evenings where going home felt like the worst option. School was stressful, home was worse, and we just wanted to kill time. There were 4 of us, me, Emily, Sarah, and Jess. We sat near the shoreline, legs stretched in the cool sand, talking about nothing important. The occasional splash from a fish breaking the water was the only sound other than our voices. After a while, we noticed another group of teens walking toward the beach from the tree line. They were 4 guys, older than us, maybe college-aged, and clearly drunk. We could hear them before we saw them. Loud, laughing, stumbling, acting like they were the funniest people in the world. The second they noticed us, they started their cringy, failed attempts at flirting, calling out to us, asking if we were waiting for our boyfriends, trying to get a reaction. It was annoying, but not unusual. One of them kept kicking sand toward us, not hard enough to actually hit us, but enough to make us uncomfortable. Another kept asking if we wanted a drink from the bottle he was holding, slurring his words. We did our best to ignore them, hoping they'd lose interest and move on. A few minutes later, the group moved further down the beach, disappearing into the dark. The tension faded a little, and we tried to get back to our conversation, but it felt different now, forced. Then I muttered, "God, those 4 guys were annoying." Jess and Emily nodded in agreement, but Sarah hesitated. She looked at me like I had said something wrong. Then she said slowly, "No, there were 5 of them." We stared at her, confused. She was completely serious. She said she had seen one of them giving a piggyback ride. She described it slowly, her voice quiet. The guy carrying the piggyback rider didn't hold the piggyback rider's legs like how you normally carry someone on your back, and his body wasn't bent down like it should have been under the weight. He was just standing there, a little tipsy, like there was nothing on his back. The piggyback rider's arms were wrapped around the guy's neck and shoulders, while his legs dangled lifelessly, moving like a rag doll strapped to his back. Every time the guy stumbled or shifted, the piggyback rider's legs swung loosely, as if there were no weight to them at all. Sarah added that the piggyback rider has this pale, dry skin, sleepy-looking eyes, and a wide, unmoving smile. Then, as Sarah watched, the piggyback rider turned his head and slowly waved at her. The way she described it, up until now, always gives me goosebumps. None of us had seen it. Only Sarah. We started comparing what we had seen, and the more we talked, the worse it got. None of us saw the piggyback rider except Sarah. The guy she saw wasn't there. We all remembered 4 drunk guys stumbling, acting stupid. But Sarah was shaking her head, pale, her hands gripping the fabric of her jeans like she was trying to steady herself. She kept repeating it, almost whispering. There were 5 of them. The 5th one waved at her. None of us wanted to stay after that. The air suddenly felt colder, the lake a little too quiet. We got up and left, walking quickly back to the car. No one talked much on the drive home. We just wanted to leave it behind. 8 years have gone by, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that we had seen something we weren't supposed to notice. That maybe, just maybe, when that guy waved, he wasn't waving to say hello. He was waving to see who would wave back. In August 2008, my younger brother and I took a trip we had been planning for months. We grew up in Lindsay, California, just the 2 of us and our mum. Our dad was never around, so we had each other's back since we were kids. We were barely a year apart, both in our early 20s then, working construction jobs, saving up for moments like this. We were both huge Radiohead fans, and when we found out they were playing the Hollywood Bowl as part of their In Rainbows tour, we knew we had to go. It was more than just seeing our favorite band. It was also an early birthday celebration for my younger brother. The concert was set for the weekend, and we figured we'd make a trip out of it, stay a couple of nights, and enjoy the city. Hotels were expensive, and since we were already spending a chunk of our money on the trip itself, we decided to rent a cheap dorm with bunk beds instead of a hotel with private rooms. It wasn't ideal, but it was clean, had good reviews, and was located close enough to the venue. Plus, splitting the cost between the 4 of us, me, my brother, and our 2 best friends, made it even more affordable. We weren't planning on spending much time there anyway. It was just a place to crash. Our 2 best friends came along, making it 4 of us in total. The dorm had a small room with 2 bunk beds. My brother took the top bunk, I took the bottom. Our friends took the other bunk bed. We checked in on Saturday, August 24th to be exact, ready for a weekend of live music and good times. The first night, we watched the concert, had a few drinks at a nearby bar, and stumbled back to the dorm around 2 a.m. The second night, same thing. We got back even later, closer to 3 a.m. Exhausted, but still buzzing from the experience. We had planned to check out by noon on Monday and drive back home. When I woke up that morning, I was groggy, my head pounding from 2 nights of drinking and barely sleeping. My vision was still blurry, but I noticed something off right away. My brother's feet were dangling from the top bunk. He always slept with socks on, so I recognized them instantly. At first, I thought he was just sitting on the edge of the bed, but something wasn't right. His feet were too low. If he were sitting up there, his legs wouldn't have dangled that far down. My headache made it hard to focus, and I just shrugged it off. I figured maybe he had slid forward while sleeping or something. I was about to grab his foot and mess with him, wake him up in the dumb way older brothers do. But the front door opened, and my brother walked in. My brain couldn't process it at first. I was looking at his feet in front of me, but also at him standing by the door. For a second, I thought maybe I was still half dreaming, the hangover messing with me. But then I saw his face, and he saw mine. His expression immediately shifted from confusion to something else, something I had never seen before. I followed his gaze, and he wasn't looking at me. He was looking up. Then he yelled, loud enough to shake me awake. "What the fuck?" Before I could even turn my head to look up, he bolted out of the room, screaming my name, telling me to get out now. My body reacted before my brain did. I jumped off the bed and ran after him, my heart pounding. I had no idea what was happening, and at first, I thought he was messing with me. But when I caught up to him in the hallway, he grabbed my shirt and pulled me toward the elevator. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He looked genuinely terrified. I started getting pissed, thinking this was some elaborate prank. In the elevator, I muttered that they were just trying to mess with me. That's when he told me that he and our two friends had already been downstairs at the coffee shop. My stomach dropped. He had come back to wake me up for breakfast. When he opened the door, he saw what I had seen, feet dangling from the top bunk. But he hadn't seen someone sitting there. He had seen someone hanging. A man, a full-grown man, hanging from a rope attached to the ceiling by his neck. I felt my stomach churn. I had almost grabbed his foot. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been one of our friends. Maybe he had just imagined it. But then the elevator doors opened, and I saw them, our two friends, sitting in the small coffee shop in the lobby, sipping their drinks. They had been downstairs the whole time. We walked over to them, shaken. At first, they just laughed it off, teasing us for getting spooked. But when they saw how pale we were, how we weren't joking, they just exchanged looks, stood up, and volunteered to grab our bags. When they came back to the lobby, they swore up and down that there hadn't been anyone in our room. But the second they stepped inside, they said it felt freezing, like dead of December freezing, even though the AC was barely running. We checked out an hour later, grabbed our things, and got the hell out of there. No one ever talked about it again. Not on the drive home, not in the weeks after. I don't know what I saw that morning. I don't know if my hangover made me blind to something I should have noticed, or if I was just seconds away from seeing what my brother did. But every now and then, I think about it, and I still wonder what would have happened if I'd pulled on that foot. This happened just last December in New York City. The winter in this city always had a way of making everything feel sharper. The air stung, the sidewalks were lined with slush, and people moved with that impatient winter urgency. I had been living in the city for almost 3 years, working at a marketing firm in Midtown, juggling long hours and an unspoken expectation to always be available. It was exhausting, but I had convinced myself it was worth it. I shared an apartment with Mia, my roommate since college. We had met during freshman year, both new to the chaos of city life, and somehow managed to keep our friendship strong despite the craziness of adulthood. She was working as a junior editor at a publishing house, constantly buried under manuscripts, but we always made time to catch up. That evening, we planned to meet at Joe Jr. Diner near our apartment for a quick, early dinner. Nothing fancy, just something warm before heading home to unwind. It was one of those spots we always ended up at when we didn't want to cook or spend too much money eating out. I got there first, grabbed a table by the window, and ordered some fries to hold me over. The streets were still busy, headlights reflecting on the wet pavement. I checked my phone. Mia was running late. While waiting, I spotted someone walking slowly past the window. It was the hot dog vendor who usually set up near our apartment. Mia and I had bought food from him plenty of times, especially on nights when neither of us felt like cooking. He was one of those vendors who never talked much, just nodded when you ordered, handed you the food, and moved on. He's efficient and quiet, but he really looked bad. His face was streaked with black dirt or mud, smeared like he had wiped his hands across it carelessly. His jacket and pants were covered in the same dark grime, his usual neat appearance replaced with a disheveled mess. His hair was matted, sticking out in uneven clumps. As he passed, he looked directly at me through the glass. His stare wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't normal either. It was too steady, too aware. It was the kind of eye contact that made my hair prickle, like he was trying to tell me something without speaking. I didn't wave. I just sat there, holding my fries, and suddenly not hungry. He kept walking, disappearing down the street. I checked my phone again. Mia was 5 minutes away. The feeling of unease didn't fade. Something about the way he moved had stuck with me. Slow, almost unnatural, like he wasn't fully there. The dirt, the messy clothes, the strange stare, none of it made sense. I had seen him nearly every week for the past 2 years, and he was always the same. He was always clean, quiet, and professional. But that night, it was like he was a completely different person. When Mia finally arrived, she looked worried, her face tense. She dropped into the seat across from me, still catching her breath. She told me that on her way to the diner, she had passed by the hot dog stand, or what was left of it. The wreckage of an SUV was still there, its front end crushed into the metal cart. The ambulance had just left, and a small crowd had gathered, staring at the wreckage. She'd stopped for a moment, asking what happened, and one of our apartment neighbors had filled her in. The SUV was speeding and lost control. It had slammed hard into the hot dog cart, completely wrecking it. And the vendor, he was run over and was pinned under the SUV. It killed him instantly. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. What made it creepier is that the accident had happened an hour ago, but I had just seen him walking past the diner, looking right at me. I tried to explain what I had just seen, but Mia just sat there, silent. The more I talked, the more ridiculous it sounded, even to me. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had seen someone else. Maybe my brain had played a trick on me, mixing up what I had heard and what I thought I had seen. We finished eating quickly, neither of us saying much. By the time we stepped outside, the city felt different, emptier, quieter, even though the streets were still full of people. We walked back to our apartment, passing the now abandoned crash site. The cart had been removed, but there were still shards of glass and scraps of metal on the sidewalk. I half expected to see the vendor standing nearby, watching us. But there was nothing, just the fading sound of traffic and the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. I had been living in an upper-middle-class condo in Surfside, Florida, for many years. It wasn't the flashiest building, but it was home. The view wasn't perfect, but I liked the feeling of living near the ocean, the breeze rolling in every morning, the sound of waves faintly audible if I kept my windows open. My work kept me busy. I worked in a hedge fund as an operations associate, a high-paying but demanding job that had me crunching numbers, analyzing financial reports, and managing portfolios for clients. The workload was relentless, and the pressure to meet deadlines never let up. It wasn't unusual for me to come home late, drained from the day, barely having enough energy to cook dinner. I told myself it was just part of the job. If I wanted to stay ahead, I had to push myself. That mindset worked until it didn't. The headaches started on Monday, June 21st. I remember it clearly because it was my second Monday back in the office after my company implemented a hybrid work schedule, part remote, part in office, following the pandemic lockdown. This headache isn't the kind you can ignore because of the dull, persistent ones that throb behind your eyes. I chalked it up to stress, dehydration, or lack of sleep, took a couple of painkillers, and moved on with my day. It wasn't a big deal that by the time I finished my meetings, answered emails, and wrapped up calls, I had forgotten all about it. The next day, the headache came back. Same spot, same intensity. I kept pushing through it, telling myself I'd drink more water, eat better, get more rest. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just exhaustion. It felt different, like something pressing against the inside of my skull, like a weight I couldn't shake. By June 23rd, I was completely wiped out. I got home from work earlier than usual, around 7:30 p.m., skipped dinner, and collapsed into bed. The headache had dulled, but I could still feel it lingering. I didn't even check my phone. I just wanted to sleep. At 11 p.m., I woke up to the worst pain I had ever felt in my life. It wasn't just a headache anymore. It felt like my skull was being cracked open from the inside. My vision blurred, and then the high-pitched noise started. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my head. It was frantic, high-pitched, and relentless, almost like a scream but not quite human. It sounded like a shrill, grating sound that made my entire body tense. I couldn't make it stop. I gripped my temples, pressing my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The sharp ringing grew louder, bouncing between my skull like an alarm I couldn't shut off. I stumbled to my medicine cabinet, fumbling for anything to dull the pain. That's when I realized I was out of painkillers. I told myself to just sleep it off, to power through it like I always did. But the pain was relentless, and the noise in my head wouldn't stop. I felt like I was losing my mind. By 11:40 p.m., I gave up. I needed medicine. I grabbed my car keys and left the condo, barely able to focus as I made my way to the parking garage. My head was pounding so hard that I could barely think. I checked the map on my phone, and the nearest 24-hour drugstore was 20 minutes away. I drove in a haze, gripping the wheel, my ears ringing with that same desperate sound. The drive felt endless, but eventually I made it. I bought the painkillers, popped one in my mouth before I even reached my car, and started driving back. Halfway home, I realized I'd skipped dinner. Maybe the hunger was making it worse. I pulled into a 7-Eleven, grabbed a bottle of water and some snacks, hoping it would help. But the whole time, my head felt like it was going to explode. By the time I left the store, it was close to 1 a.m. The pain in my head had barely eased, despite taking the painkillers nearly an hour ago. The high-pitched noise in my ears hadn't stopped either, only getting sharper, cutting through my thoughts like nails scraping against glass. As I turned from 88th Street onto Collins Avenue, my vision blurred for a moment. I had to slow down, gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to push through the pain. The street light stretched unnaturally in my vision, and every sound outside felt muted, like I was moving through a tunnel. My condo building was just ahead. I could already see its familiar silhouette against the dark sky. Then, the noise in my head changed. It didn't fade. It spiked, so loud and sharp that it sent a jolt through my entire body. It felt like an alarm screaming directly into my skull. My hands trembled, my heart pounded, so I had to pull over. I veered toward the curb, stopping just across from my condo building. The entrance was right there, just a short drive away. I clenched my teeth, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to breathe through it. And then I heard it, a deep, thunderous crack. At first, I thought it was the noise in my head, but then I felt the tremble beneath me. The ground seemed to shudder, and in the split second it took for my brain to register what was happening, I looked up. The middle section of my condo building just collapsed. It didn't happen slowly. It wasn't like the way buildings crumble in movies, piece by piece. It just dropped. The floors gave way all at once, folding into themselves like a house of cards in free fall. 1 second, the building was standing. The next, the entire central section was gone. A cloud of thick, choking dust erupted into the street, swallowing the sidewalks, the parked cars, everything in its path. The rumbling sound was deafening, a heavy roar of twisting metal and breaking concrete. Screams pierced through the chaos. I sat frozen in my car, staring at the place where my home had been. The 6th floor, my floor, was gone. Everything I owned, everything I had left behind just an hour earlier, was buried in rubble. The bedroom I had slept in, the couch where I had spent lazy weekends, the kitchen where I was supposed to be making breakfast in the morning, all gone. I threw my car door open and stumbled out, my legs shaking. People were running from the street, from nearby buildings, their voices a mix of panic and disbelief. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. I turned in time to see neighbors staggering out from the wreckage, their faces coated in white dust, some limping, some screaming for loved ones. A woman stood near the entrance, sobbing, staring at the place where her apartment used to be. Emergency sirens began wailing in the distance, and at that moment, a wave of nausea hit me as I realized that if I hadn't left for painkillers, I would have been in my bed, right in the middle of it all. I would have been inside when it collapsed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a chilling thought settled in. It was the noise, the ringing in my ears, the unbearable pressure, the pain that had driven me out of the building that night. What if it wasn't just a headache? What if something had been warning me to leave? The first fire truck screeched onto the street, flashing lights cutting through the dust-filled air. The chaos around me blurred, but all I could do was stare at the gaping hole where my home used to be. The void where my life had been seconds away from ending. I didn't even remember how long I stood there. Eventually, I felt someone grab my arm, pulling me back, moving me away from the wreckage. I just let them. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore, like I had left a part of myself inside that building, buried under the concrete and steel. Days later, sitting in a hotel room, I watched the footage of the collapse play on a loop across every major news channel. My phone buzzed constantly. Co-workers, distant relatives, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, all checking if I was okay. The name Champlain Towers South was everywhere, tied to one of the deadliest structural failures in US history. The reports all pointed to the same thing: cracks in the foundation, water damage, years of ignored warnings. It was a disaster waiting to happen. On June 24th, 2021, At 1:22 a.m., the central and eastern sections of the building collapsed, taking 98 lives with them. That was my home, or at least what was left of it. 98 people lost their lives that night. I was supposed to be number 99. All right, we've reached the end of tonight's stories. I'll let the rain take over from here. Just relax, drift off, and get some rest. See you next time.